Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
2023 was a fantastic year for us. We had the privilege of speaking with loads of great writers and telling a ton of stories.
So in this episode, we've collected all of the stories from our guests who joined us during Season 7.
If you like any of the stories you hear, please do consider getting some of the writers' work in whatever format works for you. All of them will appreciate new readers, and you can even follow them on social media or join their newsletters to really let them know you like their work.
So first up in Season 7 of The Tiny Bookcase, Tim Major joined us for the prompt, The Horizon.
The Horizon. Talos, the bronze giant, watched the waters. His great limbs were taut. In his hands he held a boulder. He did not sit. It was not only a matter of vigilance. Perhaps he no longer could sit. The sea was flat and as bronze as a shield, as bronze as Talos's chest. For 2 days there had been nothing on the horizon. Specks floated in his vision. Were they birds? It was impossible to tell. The specks were always there, dancing. Talos could not become tired, and yet. His body could not ache, and yet. A ship appeared on the horizon, sails glowing orange in the sunlight, masts like toothpicks, a curved hull, the suggestion of a figure carved into the prow. The ship was too far away to see its crew. Talos never liked to see them. He threw the rock. It blotted the sun for a moment as it arced. Did it strike the ship directly? Or did it drop nearby, causing a swell that capsized it? It hardly mattered. It was gone now. Talos moved on, casting around for boulders. Parts of the coast were smooth, where once they had been ragged with spikes. The day would come when he would have levelled the entire island. He found a boulder. He hefted it in his hands. He turned and watched the waters. Time passed. It was not his place to have thoughts, other than spying and then sinking the ships that approached the island. Time passed. It was not his place to wonder if this way was the only way. Time passed. It was wrong to mourn his loss of agility, the creaking sounds when he shifted his stance, the boredom and the dull pain. Time passed. Where was Hephaestus? Talos told himself that all this had happened before, the rust, the ache. Hephaestus the blacksmith had built him. Talos might call him a father. When the rust became too great a burden, Hephaestus would arrive. He would tend to Talos and make him new. Sometimes Talos wondered how this could be. If Hephaestus arrived by ship, mightn't he throw a rock as usual and destroy it? Destroy his father? Talos knew that he possessed no imagination, so he could not imagine his father struggling in the water, arms outstretched, and nobody to help him as he sank. Time passed. The sea was flat and as bronze as a shield. Talos put down the rock. He turned to look at the hill in the centre of the island. As he moved inland, he thought of the Queen. His role was to protect the island, but he was also protecting the Queen in her palace. She was not his mother, but perhaps she would advise him all the same. The trees shook as he tramped up the hill. The ache in his limbs was almost too much to bear. His joints screamed metal on metal. His chest burned. There was no palace. There were no courtiers. There was no queen. There was only a plain vault. The vault was large and protruded from the rock like a thumb. From the coast, Talos had imagined it was the palace. He had been a fool. He saw no sign of Hephaestus. He called for Hephaestus by name. Then he called Father. The island was smaller than he'd realized. From here at its center, the sea was visible on all sides. For a time, he watched for ships. But the view was better at the coast, the sea more like a bronze shield. Beside the vault, a stick protruded from the ground. Upon it hung a rag. At first Talos had dismissed it. Now he looked closer. It marked a grave. Talos was incapable of weeping, but his eyes stung, his throat constricted. There was no name written on the grave, but Talos understood that it was his father's. Time passed. Talos was an orphan. Time passed. Talos was alone. Time passed. How could this have happened? He was incapable of mourning, or rage, or desolation. He prized open the door of the vault. At least he might know what he was protecting. The vault contained no treasures. It contained piles of limbs. His own limbs. And a forge to make new ones. He pulled one of the limbs from the vault. It was identical to his right calf, but it had not a trace of rust. He wrenched off his right leg and set it aside. Then he rooted within the vault for a thigh, a foot. He linked them and then he pushed them into place. When he flexed his leg, there was no ache. Hurriedly, he replaced the other leg, then both arms. He was incapable of joy, but when he stood on his new legs, he raised his new arms and he bellowed at the sky, shouting to the gods that his pain was gone. Yet when he bowed his head, his neck creaked and he winced. His chest hurt too. It was not pain in there, precisely, but it hurt all the same. Could he replace his torso? He told himself that all this had happened before. It must have. Hephaestus must have performed this work once. But Talos could not remember. He could not remember these repairs in the past. He could not remember... He shook his head, but the thought came into it anyway. He could not remember Hephaestus. Was he a man? A god? Was his face kind or stern? Was he bearded and old, or an agile youth? He could not remember his father. It was no easy matter to replace his torso, but he found that his arms retained their strength for a time after being detached. Their new nimble fingers worked quickly. He did not shout at the sky in triumph. The pain in his chest had not been physical pain. Loss continued to feel like loss. Talos looked around. The view was not so good from the centre of the island. His orders were to watch the sea from the coast, to throw rocks at any ships that approached, to protect the island, to protect... not the queen. There was no queen. And now there was no Hephaestus. All that he protected was the vault, his own limbs, himself. Why? To obey his orders. But that did not answer the question well enough. Why? He understood what he was to do. Yet the years of standing on the coast resulted in doubt as much as rust. Within the vault were heads, his own heads, unrusted, blank. He had done it before. He drew one of the new heads from the vault. He tested its weight in his hands. He was to replace his head, then return to the coast, then watch the waters, his great limbs taut, in his hands a boulder. Again and again. To obey his orders. Why? He pushed the vault door shut. He bent to the grave. He extended one great finger and touched the rag tied to the stick. He said goodbye. Then he made his way down the hill on his new legs. He returned to the coast. He did not search for rocks. He watched the waters. The sea was flat and as bronze as a shield. He held the new head in his hands. A ship appeared. Talos watched the ship traverse the horizon. It did not come closer to the island. If it had, Talos would have done nothing about it. He moved along the coast. He would find a good place to sit, and he would throw the new head into the water, far from the island. Then he would watch the flat sea, bronze as a shield. He would watch ships passing and birds dancing. For as long as it took.
Then Dave Ragg joined us for the prompt bitching.
The bitching hour. The stink rising from the toilet bowl tells me I've had too much coffee. It sleeps out, and if I hit the stims now, I'll have nothing left when the call comes. If the call comes. A splash of cold water, and another slammer of nasty hotel powder coffee it'll have to be. At least the room's flash. Clean lines and realistic marble effect, aggressive aircon, quality air guaranteed in the terms. Outside the black slab of window it's raining, hot and acrid, but the room is a hermetic refuge. Just me, the smell of my coffee piss already blasting out of the hidden venting in the bathroom pod, and the case on the bed. Ugly fucker it is. Looks more like a tombstone than ever. Another look at the hotel phone, nestled in the corner of the desk space, a self-conscious anachronism. 3 rings, no more, no less, will be the signal. 5 is right out. Time check. Far past late, not yet early. The bitching hour, when thoughts wander in stillness and solitude. There's whiskey in the minibar, that ghastly blended shit that only desperate tourists would junk their credit on. So other stuff doesn't exist outside minibar fridge units in outwardly upmarket joints across the globe. Maybe there's a wholesale conspiracy, shipping this swill, salvage from distillery drains, greasing palms in hospitality circuits, sneaking crates of little piss bottles into fridge cubes via hidden compartments in the housekeeping trolleys. I stare at the neat little bottles a little too long, then shut the fridge with a puff of sealant. I hadn't realised I'd open it. Once I know the job's off, maybe I'll come back to those little bottles. Not like the rooms in my name or my cred. Although if it's really off, I might need to take them to go. Make more coffee, pulling the tab on the heater pad and watching the bubbles rise. Smells the same on the way in as it does on the way out. The phone is silent. A single red dot, its only sign of life in the room's blue gloom. Years ago, I'd wondered why hotels still put phones in their rooms, given the cascade of alternatives for guests to communicate their every need. Now I know better. They won't call my presence. They can't. And I can't call them. The room is the job. The phone in the corner is the job. The case on the bed is the job. I've not opened it. Not until I know the job's on. But I know what's inside. Phone silent. Its red light a sad, steady glow. Coffee still rank. Worse as it cools. I sit on the bed's edge, close to the case, the imitation cotton sheets rucking authentically at my arrival. Fight the temptation to put a hand on it, to run my fingers along the fastenings, relive some memories. Such shitty memories. It is the bitching hour after all. Deep sigh, tasting clinging coffee residue. There's an odd feeling about this job, a dullness. I become numb to my own feelings about it. An older part of me remembers swearing off this kind of work, laughing at the idea. The older self remembers the younger. Things have changed. But that's what they do, isn't it? Things. Fuckers. A sound, a heart-stopping sound. I'm off the bed, halfway to the desk, but the phone remains inert. Corridor noise. Other guests, one taking a call as he passes, his voice a mumble through the wood effect door plating. I can feel the thump of my heartbeat. No need to check telemetry. Sink back to the bed as silence returns, enveloping, enclosing. I feel a tingle now, something that doesn't show up on the internal monitoring. Is that relief? The old me is chuckling, wizened and cracked. Would probably be wheezing if I'd let her keep smoking. I picture my old Thea, my mother's aunt, in the last of the visits I made to the old country, sitting in her ancient chair on the bleached veranda, her eyes screwed up against the evening sun, wreathed in cheroot smoke and cackling. Afraid, says my old self in her voice. Get to fuck, I say out loud. Afraid. Shit. There are few fears left, in the realm of the physical at least. Once you've been treated to the closest thing to death the body can get before there's no coming back, you can have a hard time regaining what might be called a level outlook. The plates in my abdomen, the artificial organs, the weave of my skin and synthetic fibres of my musculature, the feed into my optic nerve of a litany of aggregated data. There's very little that can do me serious harm out there, and I'm going to see it coming. The old woman is still chuckling, looking through her crinkled eyes, her skin like a walnut. Yeah, afraid. Afraid of what this job makes me. Maybe not this one, but when it's successful, when it will be successful, the jobs that follow. Bigger, more sensitive, higher profile, riskier. Of course they'll pay better. God knows I could use the credit. But when you take a certain kind of work above a certain profile, well, there are going to be repercussions. I had a sergeant who liked to say there were two types of people: those prepared to do whatever it took to get what they wanted, and everyone else. Of course, he meant that we should be like the first kind, but here's the secret. If everyone's like that, we're all fucked. Well, it's only got room for a certain quotient of sociopaths. It's the big swinging dicks treating geopolitics as a pissing contest that got us where we are today, after all. Still, it's a growth market for acid-resistant umbrellas and smart prosthetics, so I, of all people, should be grateful. When it comes to the job, which has now taken on proper noun significance in my embattled psyche, the people on the other end of the hotel phone are going to be the first kind. Just doing whatever it takes, eh? Or hiring a washed-up super soldier for the hard parts. If you got it, flaunt it, right? Speculate to accumulate. I'm not supposed to have to weigh shit like this. I miss the days of simple employment, a chain of command, or at least a structure, analysts and shit. People, a framework you could put your trust in, even, God help us, the accountants. Christ knows I shouldn't have to track my own finances. There seems to be a dearth of numerate black market hackers at my disposal now. You think that would be a growth market? But what's the choice here? A return to state work? Noble duty in the service of HMG and Associates? Like they'd let me in the front door. But there's disavowal and disavowal. No stranger to the tradesman's entrance in any number of the old Grand Whitestones. I still know people, or people who know people. Maybe I could drum up some old friends. Get some work on the books that didn't leave me sweating coffee through my neck in barren hotel rooms. But there's the rub, or rather the scratch, or lack thereof. HMG aren't exactly flush, which is how I came to be freelancing in the first place, lest we forget. Doubt they've got much of a grey ops budget, let alone anything darker. And how much faith do I have in their decisions, or those of the city fathers in the special economic zone that pull their strings? Perhaps I could just retire. Head into the shires. Find a little cottage somewhere. Eke up my days doing something with my hands. Carpentry, maybe. Assuming I could afford any actual wood. Which is doubtful, without exactly the kind of work I'd be abandoning. Maybe one of my connections through the Eastports could send me up something synthetic. Slap a bit of varnish or lead-thick paint on it. No one round that way will want to look too closely. I could sell it at a market. Shires, that's old wounds. Family, or what's left of it. The rump that toughed it out after division. And fuck knows what I do the first time a finger locks or a knee freezes up. Turns out I'm in need of a support structure of my own, not to mention self-care machine parts and a regular supply of high-grade pharmaceuticals. Which brings us back to the lucrative world of potentially globally stabilizing freelance work. The fucking case is still there, beside me on the bed like a dead lover. Cold, morbid, seen. I don't want the job. I don't want what's in the case. I don't want the call. I'm going to get out of this. Give my apologies. Work it out somehow. When I get back shoreside, I'll dig up some of those contacts. Put some old names in the less renowned agencies. People know me. People owe me. If I call in every favour, I should be able to grind out one paying gig at least, even if it's not market rates. I could ring. 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 Silence. Time to go to work.
Miles Fisher came next with his historical story for the prompt Wingman.
The Black Hills of South Dakota rise from the neighboring Great Plains. They are a desirable land of plenty, home of the buffalo and home of the Lakota, as well as the neighboring rivals like the Crow. Countless legendary warriors from the Lakota, identified by their large feathered headdresses, are remembered. Names like Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Red Cloud. They are warriors and raiders, legendary for defending their land and providing for their tribe and family. But there is more to life than buffalo hunts and war parties. Some just want to find love. And to find love as a Lakota, you have to do things a little differently. High Horse is a young Lakota man. He doesn't come from one of the great families in his tribe, but he is nice enough, handsome and fit, but he is a bit floundering, happy to follow, but without signs of aspiring greatness. He has fallen for a beautiful young girl in his tribe. He has hardly ever spoken to her, but she is very pretty and from a good family. He knows she will make a great wife. As a Lakota man, if you want to begin courting a young woman, your choices are pretty limited. There are some traditions. For example, he could play for her a courting flute. They take effort to make, but mimic the bugle of a bull elk during rut. It is very alluring. Then, if she likes him, he could talk to her parents. But that's risky, and High Horse takes a different route. This girl's parents are very protective. He can't be so brash as to flute for her. They would put a stop to the courting right away. No, he loves her. To talk to her and win her over, he needs to be cunning. That night, he sneaks up to her teepee and waits for her to come out. But she doesn't. As day breaks, High Horse is forced to retreat as to not be seen. Discouraged, he tells his friend and cousin, Red Deer. They decide on another course of action. In the day, he will wait by the stream where she goes to fetch water as part of her chores and hide in the bushes. People don't go down there very often. Most don't want to offend the water spirit. They fear it, but it has never bothered the two boys. High Horse says to Red Deer, "When she comes by, if no one is looking, then I will jump out and hold her and make her listen to me. If she likes me too, I can tell that by the way she acts, for she is very bashful and may not say a word or even look at me the first time." Amazingly, the plan worked. High Horse caught her by the stream and he felt like it went very well. He later says to Red Deer, "She didn't say anything. She might really like me." So High Horse goes to see the girl's father. He is an elder in the tribe. The girl is his only child. For the Lakota, if a man is ready to marry a woman, he needs to offer her father a dowry. On the high plains, in the land of the buffalo hunters, horses are the greatest form of payment. When High Horse approaches the girl's father, he confesses his love for her. He offers her father 2 horses. It is all he has. But without a word, the old man waves him away. High Horse is crushed. He feels physically ill. He doesn't know what to do. Red Deer finds High Horse in a dejected state. To help his friend, he offers to give him both of his horses to increase the dowry. High Horse is beyond grateful. He promises to pay Red Deer back after they go on the warpath again. With some confidence, High Horse goes back to the old man, now with 4 horses. But without a word, he is waved away again. High Horse pleads with the old man. Surely 4 horses has to be enough. There is hardly another young man who can give him much more than that in the tribe. But the old man doesn't speak. He just stands there in stoic silence, and High Horse knows he hasn't changed his mind. He leaves, depressed. He knows 4 horses are all he can get. He feels so sick he is going to die, and he has lost his appetite. Aimlessly, he goes to sulk in the forest. After not too long, by chance, he sees the girl walking by. He thinks it must be fate. He grabs her again and begs her to run away with him, but she says no, that she will not run away with him because she wants to be bought like a fine woman. High Horse hope turns to despair. He lets her go and he leaves. He doesn't know what to do. He is more lovesick than he has ever been. He can't eat. He can hardly sleep. He can't buy the woman he loves, and she will not run away with him. All he can think about is giving up. It kills him because he knows that all the Lakota that people tell stories about would never have done that. They were good for something. High Horse can't even win over a girl or her father. He feels worthless. Red Deer can't stand to see his friend this way. He rallies him with a speech, saying to High Horse, "She will not run away with you. Her old man will not take 4 horses, and 4 horses are all you can get. You must steal her and run away with her. Then, after a while, you can come back, and the old man cannot do anything because she will be your woman." High Horse looks at Red Deer unconvinced, but he adds, "Probably she wants you to steal her anyway." High Horse thinks that maybe she does. Besides, that might be his only reasonable option, so he agrees. That night, late, they sneaked up to the teepee of the girl's family and waited until it sounded as if the old man, her mother, and the girl were asleep. Then High Horse crawled under the teepee with a knife. The knife isn't to do harm to her father. Rather, it's because the father isn't a dummy. He has spoken to High Horse, he has seen him sneaking around. Knowing that kidnapping for love is an option, he ties his daughter down at night with leather straps to keep her safe. The plan is to cut her free, drag her out of the teepee, gag her because in all of her excitement she may not be quiet, and then throw her on a horse to hightail it out of there. But before that can happen, High Horse notices cutting the straps is harder than he anticipated. His knife is dull. He makes it through a couple of the straps, but as he struggles to cut the last one, the blade slips, and by mistake, he slices the girl's leg. She screams, alerting everyone within shouting distance. With one nervous cut, the plan is ruined. Before they know what happened, High Horse sneaks out of the teepee. It is dark, and in the middle of the night, he and Red Deer are chased by the old man and some of the warriors in nearby teepees, but in the chaos, they are narrowly able to escape. No one for sure knew it was them. In the morning, the young men sit by the stream outside the village. High Horse feels so ill and lovesick he just wants to die. Nothing has worked. He hasn't slept or eaten in days. Red Deer hates to see his friend this way. While looking at the stream, he comes up with another plan. He jumps up and says, "I am sure if you are man enough, we can steal her this time." Desperate for help, before even hearing the plan, High Horse agrees. Red Deer then has High Horse stripped down naked. He paints him solid white with black stripes down his body. Black rings are painted around his eyes. He looks like a water spirit, the one everyone fears. Red Deer tells High Horse that he looks terrible, scary even to him, and that if you get caught again, everyone will be so scared they will think that you are a bad spirit. They will be afraid to chase you. Other than the spirit paint, the plan is exactly the same. So that night, they sneak back into the girl's teepee. High Horse crawls in with a now sharpened knife, and Red Deer hangs out outside with some horses, ready to gag her when High Horse drags her out. As he's cutting one of the tighter straps, it pops, and the girl's mother wakes up. It's dark. She can't see, but she thinks someone is there. She tries to wake her husband, but he's not having it and falls back to sleep. To be safe, High Horse lays low and still. But before he's confident the mother is sleeping again, his mind wanders, and after days of restlessness, he nods off. Outside the teepee, Red Deer waits, but hours go by and daybreak comes. He leaves as to not be seen. With the morning light illuminating the inside of the teepee, the girl wakes up. Still tied down, she turns her head. There, she sees, laying next to her, a big white striped animal. She screams. Everyone wakes up, and again, High Horse has to run. He escapes down to the creek and hides in a hollow tree. Those who gave chase gave up quickly. They were content that the water spirit had returned to the creek. When the coast is clear, Red Deer goes again to find his friend. Upset at failing again, High Horse elects not to return to the village. But this time, Red Deer sees something else in him. His friend is not despondent. He is sad and embarrassed, but now there is something else. High Horse says he's going to go on the warpath. He is tired of being lovesick and hungry. He is going to clear his mind. Red Deer, ever the friend, doesn't miss a beat, and the two start walking toward enemy territory. They travel for a few days, and one night at sundown, they come across a village, Crows, the arch rival of the Lakota. Wary of raids, scouts would usually warn the tribe of incoming war parties, but the two boys remain undetected. Just outside the village, they find a single Crow warrior guarding all the tribe's horses. They think there must be 100. Red Deer wants to be cautious, but High Horse, reflecting on his passive nature, isn't willing to be so careful. What has being timid gotten him? With the stealth of sneaking into a girl's teepee, he approaches the guard and kills him. Before daybreak, they make off with the horses. They fled with the herd for 3 days, driving them quickly back to their own village as fast as they could. When they get there, it is morning on the third day. With a sense of accomplishment, High Horse drives the herd right outside the teepee of the old man and the girl that he loves. Hearing the commotion, the old man rises from his teepee. The first thing he sees is a massive herd and High Horse walking directly up to him. Standing upright and confident, High Horse says, "Is this enough horses for me to marry your daughter?" The old man looks back. and after a moment he smiles and says, "You may marry my daughter, but it was not the horses I wanted. All I wanted was a son that was a real man and good for something."
Anna Stevens joined us with her epic tale for the prompt Roar.
The CST 488 Burgeoning Hope. Aggro Deck 2, port side stern. Alpha crept like wire blight down the corridor, worn rubber shoes made from cannibalized pipe insulation squeaking against the metal floor. Her heart slammed against her ribs and she rubbed her thumb against the smooth, ancient laser pistol, unconvinced it worked. She didn't dare risk a test shot in case she woke whatever lay ahead. Unless it's already awake and waiting for me. If that were true, Alpha would shoot every bolt she had and run screaming in the other direction. Supposing it fired. Supposing the thing let her run. If not, well, there would definitely be screaming. She approached a light well, the sun they were orbiting describing a swift, incandescent arc around the corridor, pulsing in through each aperture in turn until the middle of the corridor was strobed in alien sun and her destination beyond it invisible despite squinting. The metal floor and metal wall were both silent and cold beneath her feet and trembling hand. The engines that stabilized the ship's orbit hadn't lived in 3 generations now. The only thing they still had was standard G, courtesy of the massive solar power gravity ring spinning around the dead ship. It gave them up and down, but couldn't prevent them falling serenely and silently and without obvious complaint into the sun's gravity well. Their engineers estimated they had another 5 Earth standard years before there was no way out, even with functioning engines. If only burning up in the atmosphere of a hostile sun was their biggest problem. Alpha took a few more steps and then flipped down her visor, cutting the fierceness of the strobing light until the corridor beyond was visible. There was another light well, and another, set every 250 meters along the wide, curving corridor that led eventually to the first set of sealed blast doors. Beyond those doors, generations ago, a disaster had ripped through their transport, killed the engines and all but the 100 or so agro-scientists and farmhands tending the algae pools, and left them to live, die, and circle a star until they fell in. Burgeoning hope, my arse. When Alpha had signed up as a scavenger looking for components, resources, and alternate routes to the engines, she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected this corridor, those sealed blast doors. And she definitely hadn't expected the possibility of facing down whatever had got into the other end of the ship at some point in the last decade. But the truth was, there were no other routes left to explore. No other corridors left that went in the right direction and weren't open to vacuum. Ventilation had sealed to prevent fire spread, and the EVA suits they had were old and few. The plant life that kept them alive produced more than enough oxygen for them to live, but with the engines dead, they had no way to compress it into tanks. The one experiment with an air umbilical when Alpha had been a child was still bumping around somewhere on their hull. Turned out a human couldn't breathe through a few 100 meters of narrow tube. He'd lost consciousness, and then the umbilical had snagged on something, and that was it. And we didn't even get to put him in the fertilizer. Alpha stepped through the sweep of sunlight, convinced she felt its heat despite the thickness of the window, and into the darkness beyond. Stepped over the rim of open blast doors, fingertips brushing the dusty control panel for luck, and on, leaving light behind and walking towards more. More light, same sun. 5 Earth standard years. 1 more kilometre to the seal, and beyond, eventually, to the engine rooms. 4 decks above that and another kilometre forward, main navigation. She knew the layout of the ship from the plans lasered into bulkheads at each main corridor junction. Each had been painstakingly amended in paint after every significant recon mission. She'd watched over the years as every other viable route to the engine room had been crossed off. In her youthful hubris, she'd been convinced she'd be the one to find the last remaining safe and open route. Instead, she'd been ordered here, to this, the one route they knew took them through hostile territory. Alpha was descended from botanists and agriculturalists. She knew the seeding properties of zero-G barley and the pollination cycle of plants that had evolved in response to the absence of a home sun. She didn't know what lay beyond those blast doors. No one did. They knew only of its rage. She glanced reflexively down at the chest harness and the camera it held. There was another on the barrel of the pistol, though whether that worked along with the gun itself remained to be seen. Whatever she was seeing, so were they, unless it crept up on her from behind. Alpha's mouth dried and she glanced back. Nothing but a ring of light. She kept going. As part of her training, Alpha had read every manual the AgDec had and all those found by her predecessors as they crawled around the ship looking for ways to resurrect it. She had theoretical knowledge not only of the engines themselves, but of navigation too. If she made it to the engine room, she could call for backup to help with the startup procedures. And with control of the engine deck, they'd be one step closer to getting out of Gravity Well. To going home, whatever that meant, wherever that was. Pistol in her sweating grip, Alpha strode towards the next light well, through it and over the blast door rim, and the next, visor flipping down and up as necessary, until, abruptly, she was there. The sealed door. Beyond it, 500 meters to the main engine room. A single mad dash. Alpha peered through the aperture. The distant light well strobing revealed nothing between her and it, and nothing beyond. Everything lost to pulsing light and pulsing shadow. Before she could lose her nerve, she slapped her hand against the pad. With a hiss of atmosphere and a low grind, dust and dirt in the tracks, the door slid aside. A waft of foul air engulfed Alpha, and she held her breath, wrinkling her nose and pistol raised in both hands. Shooter's stance. Nothing. No movement. Just the silence of a dead ship tumbling around a hungry star. She waited for so long her arms started to tremble under the pistol's weight, and then stepped over the rim and in. 500 meters. A single mad dash. Another step. Another, faster, shifting her weight into the balls of her feet, preparing to run. A low, ominous rumble echoed towards her, growing and fading like breath, like her breath if she could remember to breathe. She raised the pistol again and dared another step, and the rumble came again and then grew in volume, louder and higher pitched, a sudden roar of rage and vengeance and need and hunger, so much hunger. Alpha's hands tightened convulsively and she squeezed off a shot. The pistol kicked, the laser projectile digging a trench through the metal wall 30 meters away. The roar cut off into abrupt, vengeful silence. In the distance, metal scraped on metal, and there was, perhaps, the suggestion of a shadow moving, counter to their tumble around the sun. Shit. Shit, shit. Alpha turned and ran. Habipod, deck 2, starboard side aft. I heard something. Down there, I heard it. It's just the ship settling. Come on, it's time. But I heard it, Mummy, I really did. Enora smiled down at the boy. Maybe it was the ship saying goodbye. She winked. They had enough time for this, surely. Come on then, one last go? Yes, Micah shouted, and they crouched together at the ventilation shaft. Faces crowded into the metal tube. Enora put her arm around her son's back, and they bellowed cheerfully into the shaft, their shouts combining and twisting into something weird and monstrous as it bounced down and around and away, the boy's laugh following it. Can I do this on the new ship? Micah asked as he stood and Enora brushed him down. I'm afraid not, son. It's a long-range scout ship, remember? Grandpa should have saved a bigger ship, Micah grumbled. Enora gave him a pointed stare and he ducked his head, looked one last time at the duct in the corner of their room, and then bounded out. Enora glanced around their living space, walls scrawled with youthful drawings, the only home she'd ever known, and then she followed. We're the very last survivors, Micah. We are the burgeoning hope. Let's go find a new world to live in.
Next, Timothy Michael Cooper told a tale for the prompt Savage.
Normally, cruise ships don't reach their destination empty. Technically, neither does this one, the Princess of the Seas. It's still filled with 1,000 live lobsters, 2 tons of Brussels sprouts, 30,000 eggs, plus grapes and Wagyu beef and ice cream and Captain Morgan dark rum and everything else its passengers needed to get from Miami to Quintana Roo and back again in decadent, liquor-fueled, overfed, kids someone else's responsibility comfort. The rooms are filled with people's bathing suits and rumpled clothing. Some showers still run, now overflowing. Ice machines still create ice, while the various buffets contain hot, rapidly desiccating food. Water slides still flow. Some laundry grows mold in the machines, having sat there since the wash cycle ended. It's been 62 hours since the last recorded communication from the ship. Not that the ship lacks life entirely. There are the live lobster tanks, the small aquarium for the kids, although many of the animals have already eaten one another out of desperation. There are also 3 service dogs, 2 seeing eye dogs and 1 registered support animal, who seem thrilled to see their rescuers, though they must have had a field day with all that hot buffet food. The ship isn't entirely devoid of human life either. There's a boy. His name is Miles Travers. He's 9 years old, and he survived. Quickly, the boy is transferred to a hospital. As soon as he's been checked out comprehensively and confirmed healthy, he's questioned. They already know who he is, that he's from Tampa, that he'd been sailing with his parents, Kyle and Iris Travers. After all, every one of the 2,162 passengers and 533 crew members was carefully documented. As soon as the boy can speak, he doesn't exactly provide tons of information. He's just 9. He'd been taking a nap in the Kid Care Fun Center, in the cool wooden playhouse. Upon waking up and realizing no one was around, kids nor adults, he went searching. When the Coast Guard crew rappels down to the ship from their helicopter, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, Miles is in what one might call a savage state. Not starving, if anything, having an entire ship to yourself, from water slides to arcades to the amphitheater, where they'd seen a magic show the first evening, to unlimited bad-for-you sugary cereal, is every kid's dream. But he's bereft, weeping, terrified, understandably. He cannot say what has happened or why. The kind FBI woman interviewing him in the room in Punta Langosta, in Cozumel, tries not to show her frustration. She already knew there would be no answers. Only one fact stood out about Miles, who just finished 5th grade but showed no special promise in his classes, in his drum lessons, nor in his Little League team where he ran away from the ball any time it approached right field. What stood out was his serious heart infection, myocarditis, at age 2, which necessitated a life-saving heart transplant from a fortunate, for Miles, car crash several states over. The scar down the center of his chest was always a point of ridicule from the other boys, just like any difference at all, perceived or actual. Yet Miles must have done something pretty special to be spared from whatever awful fate had struck the other 2,694. There simply must be something this boy saw, experienced, or did to deserve this. Everything changed after I got home, now parentless, like Cinderella, or Mary Lennox in The Secret Garden, or James and Lily Potter. I was taken in by my aunt on my mother's side and uncle, who already had 2 older kids, just outside Orlando. I can't say the family was anything but nurturing, yet I always got the feeling, and I don't blame them, that they were holding me at arm's length, that they saw me as other, despite being flesh and blood, like a cursed statue or voodoo doll. I've been over it a zillion times with a dozen different therapists from the day I was returned to Florida through now in my mid-30s. But I stopped trying to remember because I remembered nothing. Except the first time I entered my bedroom in my family's little cabin on the Princess of the Seas on deck number 7. In my tiny bedroom, there were 4 teenage boys already sitting on my bed. Essentially, I now believe, each was one of the attempts my parents had made to have a child before I came along, all 4 of which ended in miscarriages or stillbirths, stuff I only learned from my aunt much later. I turned around and immediately told my parents about the boys, but hey, kids talk a lot. So I returned to the now empty room and unpacked in a hurry so we could make the magic show. At one point or another, each of the following theories dominated the internet. All have been depicted in the novelizations, the documentaries, the investigative reports, one off-Broadway musical, and four different movie versions of what happened to me aboard that ship. 1. I murdered them all. I was a supernatural entity with unreal strength, or part of some top-secret government program. My eyes or fists or brain now unstoppable weapons. Aliens. Always aliens. Like that explains everything or anything. Let me do that again. 2. Aliens. Always aliens. Like that explains everything or anything. 3. A mass suicide event, akin to the People's Temple cult in Jonestown. In this scenario, everyone walked into the sea, mutineer on a plank style, somehow forgetting about me because I was asleep in that playhouse. 4. Solar flares, which do exist but don't generally delete people from existence. 5. Pirates. Real pirates, taking their many hostages to some remote island, which would require a second cruise ship, really, and accidentally overlooking just one passenger. 6. The Bermuda Triangle, an unknowable force to explain an unknowable event. Also, the Princess of the Seas was over 1,000 miles away from the Bermuda Triangle at the time of the event. But when have actual facts ever changed anyone's mind? 7. Time travel. Everyone else went back or forward in time, but I didn't due to that heart transplant, some sort of DNA or tissue confusion. What about the many documented passengers with cadaverous tendons, donor livers, corneal transplants? So this theory also doesn't hold water, haha. Maybe I should have been a mediocre comedian instead of a moderately successful corporate communications director. I have a few more fun options for you. Perhaps some cruel animal emerged from the sea, one that no one has ever lived to report, with many rows of teeth and eye stalks and tentacles and stingers and suckers and sonar and night vision. It came aboard and slaughtered everyone, but somehow didn't smell me in that playhouse. Or maybe I manifested it all. I disappeared then, like that story Jeff D is 5, which describes a boy with the ability to instantly transport people wherever he wants, including underground. But I'm just a person who survived by accident, a person who wishes my life had more meaning. Lots of people who've experienced far lesser tragedies manage to turn their trauma into a small industry, a YouTube channel, a religion, or at the very least, a 2-book deal and a speaking tour. At least that would mean this was all worth it, the loss of 2,594 people, 2 of them my parents. But survivors aren't chosen. They're lucky, or unlucky, or they just existed. Could my heart have anything to do with it? Why should that matter to aliens, or a cult, or pirates, or time travel principles? It just doesn't seem fair that my parents were taken away from their child, their only child, the one they worked so hard for, after a mere 9 years. Other times, it occurs to me that they, the passengers, may not have disappeared, that only I did, that I'm currently lost, that this is where I went. Maybe I fell overboard and drowned. Maybe I died in my sleep from that transplanted heart, which might have had some undiagnosed weakness. Maybe it was damaged in that car crash. Whatever the case, I had no way to know I died, and thus I kept going. Middle school, high school, first kiss, first prom, college, internships, jobs, eventually a family of my own, mortgage, ailments, reunions, grandkids. If anything, that would mean I got really lucky, since I never needed to see my parents die, nor had to witness their grief at seeing me pass. To me, this is the most comforting option, that we leave the world behind, yet blithely keep moving forward, oblivious. Working, going to dinner parties, being fired, twisting our ankles, getting bee stings, dealing with clogged toilets, throwing out spoiled food, eating, sleeping, loving, breaking up, working, paying bills, surviving. The prosaicness of life eclipsing the trauma of death. How lovely to just keep going on, to wake up and emerge from that wooden playhouse and see all those people going about their day, your parents annoyed that you were hiding, then to see a show with them in the amphitheater that evening, the waves rocking you to sleep that night.
Dr. Amber Logan was next with her tale for the prompt Prosperity.
Prosperity. Considering her circumstances, the daughter of a world-weary preacher in a poverty-stricken mining town, Prosperity was a laughably bad name. I assumed it was a misguided attempt at a virtue name, names like Grace or Prudence, by folks who still thought the ground was filled with gold just ripe for the picking. Of course, I knew a thing or two about unfortunate virtue names. And it didn't help that I lived in Prosperity's old house, a ramshackle two-story that tilted when the winds came from the west. At least Prosperity and I weren't kin, though everyone accused me of it. "Oh, Charity," they'd say, "you sure Prosperity wasn't your gray auntie or something? How else would you wind up in her house?" I'd just shake my head and force a laugh. But at least no one ever suggested she was my grandma. Poor Prosperity never lived to be old enough for that. No, she died at 15, my age, and she died in the closet, having hanged herself with her preacher daddy's leather belt. Some said she was bullied because she was poor, but I always wondered whether she had been old enough to be a mama and was none too pleased about it. Of course, that closet was converted into a bathroom when the house finally got plumbing. It never bothered me much that she died in my bathroom, but the other girls liked to tease me about it, how I must like to take my clothes off in front of ghosts, that kind of thing. I didn't mind the teasing, though. At least it kept them from making fun of my shabby dresses, my greasy hair. They didn't need to know the bathroom had no hot water, and I had to heap pans of water on the stove to dump over myself in the tub. I didn't really want to invite them over. We were the only 15-year-old girls in school, but I knew we weren't friends. Never had been. For years they'd been dumping old clothes and socks on my desk at school, saying their parents had told them to give the bags to charity. I knew they only wanted to gawk at my dingy house and try out the Prosperity game. I couldn't stand the thought of the girls putting on some "yes ma'am, no ma'am" show for Mama, so I told them to come over one night when my parents would both be at the factory. Of course I wanted to shake them up a little, so before they came over I slipped some dirty nickels into the pocket of my torn jeans. And then, as soon as it was dark, I welcomed them into the fusty, too-hot entryway of my house and led them straight up the old wood stairs to the bathroom. It had to be dark for the game to work. All you needed was a dark bathroom, a candle, and a mirror. Even my house, Prosperity's house, had those. I've heard folks in other parts call the game Bloody Mary, but in Leadville, we keep things local. As we climbed the creaking steps up to the bathroom, I actually smiled, a bit of pride slipping through. It felt kind of good to live in the house of a local celebrity. We squeezed into the musty bathroom, elbows bumping, backs to walls, then closed the door and stood for a nervous minute, just breathing each other's air. Faith pulled out the candle and lit it with a lighter I know she stole from her twin brother, who liked to smoke cigarillos behind the sports shed at school. I watched their faces in the flickering light, waiting for one of the girls to step forward and start the game, to ask Prosperity for the riches they deserved. But maybe they weren't quite as brave as they let on, because they whispered for me to "go on now, get started," and jostled me toward the mirror over the sink. I held the flickering candle in one hand and slid the other into my pocket, fingering the rusty nickels so I was ready. I figured it was dark enough the girls wouldn't see me pull them out when the time was right. I stared into the dirty mirror. My face was ghostly pale, framed by oily strands of black hair. My features shifted and blurred in the fickle light. "Prosperity, Prosperity, what have you got for me?" I whispered. Faith and Joy started giggling behind me, and I turned and hissed at them over my shoulder. "Show some respect for the dead." They both shut up. Even I was surprised by the strength of my words. I turned back to the mirror. But it wasn't me in the mirror anymore. My mind started shouting at me all kinds of things. To blow out the candle, to turn on the light, to run away. No, it had to just be a trick of the light, just the strange face illusion Mr. Peterson told us about in class. But my heart knew what my mind wouldn't admit. It was Prosperity. And, oh God, maybe me and her were kin. Her dark hair was longer, braided back in 2 snaking braids, but yeah, her pale face kind of looked like mine, and her big eyes shined with mischief. My skin tingled. "Prosperity, Prosperity, what have you got for me?" I said in a stronger voice. And Prosperity smiled. Not at Faith, not at Joy. I don't think they could even see her. She smiled at me. She pulled her pale hand out of her pocket, though mine didn't move, and she showed me its contents. A whole handful of big, shiny gold coins. Our gazes met. She raised an eyebrow and I nodded, smiling back at her. Charity, what are you? Joy began, her voice wavering, but then Prosperity threw the coins at the mirror. The big gold coins rained down around us like bullets hitting a shed, though some of them hit something softer. Faith and Joy screamed so loud in that tiny room, I thought my eardrums would bust. But then they managed to get the door open and fly out the bathroom, down the stairs. They didn't even bother slamming the front door behind them. I looked back in the mirror. Prosperity was gone. I smiled. Then I bent over to collect all those coins.
We were lucky enough to hear from Aganachawe Donald Ekpeki next for the prompt submission.
Cover letter, February 19, 2020. Dear editor, I am a Nigerian writer and slush reader who is studying law in the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Please find attached my 6,732-word horror short story. I thank you for your time and consideration and look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Ogenechowe Donald Ekpeki. P.S. As an aside, I was wondering and didn't want to add something so silly to the main body of my cover letter. It's silly, really, the worries of a newbie writer. I heard that your magazine is the greatest horror magazine and will only publish the greatest horror story at a time. And in the lifetime of the published writer, will publish no other story until the accepted writer expires. Also, that should a story be accepted, the current story is deleted and the displaced writer dies. What is worse, I heard that all those rejected by your magazine also die. This is, of course, all just silly rumors. I noticed that your magazine only has one story on it, despite its ridiculously high pay rate of $100,000 per story. These are just the silly worries of a newbie writer, and your standards are probably just high. I figure you can't pay many writers with the pay rate what it is. Feel free to ignore my ridiculous query, unless, of course, you want to clarify that they are indeed just rumors. Inbox, February 20, 2020. Dear Ogenechowe, good morning. I would like to allay your fears that what you have heard are rumors, but I cannot. We do take what we do here very seriously, as storytelling is a life and death matter. You saw our pay rate. We are committed to paying handsomely for the best horror story existing in the world at any moment. And should we fail to pay the funds, we pay in other ways. Sincerely, the editors, the Magazine of Horror. Outbox, March 19, 2020. Dear editors, it's exactly 1 month, and I am now wondering what the status of my submission is. Do let me know if it's been seriously considered and when I may hear back from you. P.S. The tone of your last message, your response to my questions was really spooky, but I appreciate the humor of it from a horror magazine such as yourself. Sincerely, Ogenechowe. Inbox, March 21, 2020. Dear Ogenechowe, good morning. I would like to inform you that your story is indeed under consideration, but we lost 2 members of our staff to untimely death. Our slush reader and submissions editor just passed, immediately after passing your story on to me. We have logged your story into the under consideration pile. Funny I use the word pile as it's the only one there. You'll be hearing from us soon, in one way or the other. As an aside, do you think you want to perhaps withdraw the story? Just putting out there that it's allowed. If you think there's a better venue for you, or it's accepted elsewhere, you need only notify us. Cool? Thanks. Take care. Regards, the editor, the Magazine of Horror. Outbox, April 26, 2020. Dear editor, good afternoon. My condolences on the loss and untimely death of your slush reader and your submissions editor. Meanwhile, about your aside, what did you mean? You want to know if I am willing to consider withdrawing my story? I just want to say that I am comfortable and okay doing whatever it takes to get an acceptance in your magazine. Do let me know if the corrections I have made are sufficient. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Ogenechowe. Inbox, July 19, 2020. Dear Ogenechowe, good morning. Sorry for the late response. I am the new editor-in-chief. The old one passed away shortly after logging in your story as an acceptance and before notifying you. Congrats. I had to dig around a bit for the fine print of what to do. It says here that the contract will be delivered personally by the rider and his pale horse. I chuckled at that. They do love dramatics here. Still, personal delivery, that's odd. It says that no place is beyond the reach of the pale rider, not even the beyond. I suppose that's it. I have followed all the other instructions on how to activate a dispatch, unorthodox as they were. So I suppose you shall be hearing from this pale rider. Oh, and they spoke of some final test, assessment by the rider to ascertain if the writer is as worthy as his story. An old tradition. The rider will bear both eyes and that means, but probably an old-fashioned way of checking your personal info and story for plagiarism or just more dramatics. Do let me know location date. Sincerely, the editor, the magazine of horror. A young writer sat in front of his computer in a self-contained apartment in Abule Oja, the student community of the University of Lagos. A very electric thrill ran through him, a feeling of unquantifiable euphoria, for he had just finished reading an acceptance letter. Not just any acceptance, not even just one from a pro magazine, but one from the greatest horror magazine, certifying him the greatest horror writer alive, along with a monetary prize of $100,000, the grand lottery of short stories. The unusual terms and requirements did not dim his joy but added to it. His excitement, though not dimmed, was mixed, euphoria and trepidation. A rider delivering the contract and payment, a final test. His breathing increased with the sound of hooves on the ground outside his house, a slow canter. No way a horse was in Abule Oja, but he heard the unmistakable whinny of one, the scrape of something sharp, like a skite on the cement, as the rider dismounted. His eyes widened in terror as the door swung open to reveal his dispatch. He could never have imagined.
Next, the prompt of Chill brought Cambridge local Mark Wells to entertain our bibliomancer.
The Chill. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you know. Of course, a lot of people ignore it, put it down to a sudden draft or the first symptom of a winter cold. Some even blame it on an unknown trespasser walking over their grave, which would be easy to dismiss as an old wives' tale. But on this occasion, the latter explanation was closer to the truth. It occurred in my final year at college, which was eventful in many ways, not least that I survived a tumultuous May ball largely intact. Indeed, I actually managed to graduate after 3 years of Arc and Anth, or AA as we like to call it. A rather apt acronym, given the amount of Pims consumed at our post-exam garden party. Not that alcohol can explain what happened to me that evening. Indeed, I was remarkably sober after seeing off my friends, Ying and Trevor, at the station. Their holiday plans sounded a good deal more exciting than mine. Being dumped by a girlfriend tends to do that to one's social life. So it was with a deflated but sober mind that I returned to college to gather my thoughts and possessions for what looked like an interminably long vacation with overbearing parents and underwhelming prospects. With everyone gone but the porters and retired fellows, I passed through St. John's College First Court without meeting a soul. Even the kitchens were silent as I made my way through the passageway past the Great Hall into the 16th century splendour of Second Court. My home for the past year, I gazed around at the lidded windows, their darkened panes as empty as I felt. The only light in the square came from my turreted staircase, a sentinel to the last student remaining at the end of another academic year, or so I thought. Approaching O's staircase, I paused at the room index inside the archway. Giles Chamberlain, hand-painted against my room number, was still there for now. Ah, well, I thought, and was about to slide the indicator to in for what I expected to be the last time, when I noticed a patina of white dust covering the weathered oak. Odd. The last time I checked, the fellow resident in O1 was sniffing Victorian snuff rather than 21st century coke. But running a finger over the surface, I realised it wasn't powder at all. It was frost, the tiny crystals forming a thin layer over the framed sign. And when I tried sliding the wooden room indicator across, it remained stubbornly at out. What the hell? I muttered, but stopped on seeing my breath mist before me. That was when I felt it, a sliver of ice running down my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the court was deserted. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling I was no longer alone. As if to confirm this, a breath of air, too light to be called a breeze, wafted over my skin, the hairs rising at its cold caress. There was no doubting its source. It was coming from the staircase, which I saw now was dusted with the same crystalline sheen as the sign. Then, remembering the dry ice machines from the ball, I smiled. Very funny, I murmured. It would be just like Ying to leave such a device running at the top of the stairs, a final gotcha after all I'd put them through in May week, though the live swan in her bathroom would take some topping. I was still grinning as I entered the staircase, which already felt like a walk-in fridge. I know, because I'd raided the college kitchen on more than one occasion. I mean, where else can a chap get ice after midnight? Anyway, the air became frostier the higher I climbed, so much so that I avoided touching the metal banister. My room was on the top floor, but the spiral staircase continued up past my landing to a circular attic beneath the tower's rafters. Whatever was causing the Arctic temperatures had to be up there, because the cold was now so intense it was becoming painful to breathe. I'd like to say it was this that caused me to slow, but that wasn't the case. It was a creeping sense of foreboding that grew with every step, so that I found myself stopping before reaching the top and peering around the final turn. He sat at the top of the stairs, his pale form hunched over a leather-bound book that was resting on his knees. Though he only wore a nightshirt, he was wrapped in a sheet, the translucent folds hanging from his shoulders like a funeral shroud. This spectral impression was reinforced by the pallor of the face half hidden between a mop of white hair. I stood there, frozen in more ways than one. The figure, too, remained motionless, either oblivious or indifferent to my presence. In the end, I decided that someone had to break the ice, so to speak, and mustering what circulation I could to my lips, mumbled, "Good evening." The head lifted at once, revealing a pair of wide eyes, their dark pupils staring at me with an intensity that held me spellbound. How long this lasted I couldn't be sure, but under his unflinching scrutiny I felt as transparent as my examiner. Eventually, though, His frown eased, and the pale lips parted. "Finally," he said. Setting the book aside, he rose from his reading spot and descended towards me. Too startled and stiff with cold to back away, I grabbed the banister, gasping at the ice burn of bare metal. But this was nothing compared to the shock I felt as the apparition first touched and then passed through me. As my friends will tell you, it's rare for me to be lost for words, but to this day I struggle to describe the sensation of that lifeless form entering and leaving my body. Had it lingered even for a moment, well, I shudder to think what would have happened to my mind, let alone my body. Even after he'd gone, it took some time for the dreadful sensation to ease. Gradually, though, warmth returned to the stairwell and to my limbs. Only then, as I took in my surroundings, did I notice the book. It lay on the top step, the title page open where its reader had left it. Monus Hieroglyphica by Johannes D. It was a rare first edition, of that I had no doubt, but the chill I felt at that moment wasn't from discovering the mystical tome of John Dee, Renaissance magus and court astrologer to Elizabeth I. It was from the owner's nameplate, just visible under an icy handprint. The Very Reverend James Wood, Master of St. John's College and Dean of Ely, bequeathed by his will to his initiate, Giles Chamberlain, in the year of our Lord 1839. Oh, crap, I muttered, realizing that an arcane baton, however belatedly, had been well and truly passed.
Chloe Yates was after that, bringing her delightful self and a story for the prompt Susurration.
Susurration. The trees are whispering. It is the first clear thought the woman laying in the wash of the ocean has had since she came to. The insistent back and forth of the water is discordant with the sound of leaves rustling further up the beach. It should be more than loud enough to drown out that other greener noise, but it doesn't. Unable to move much beyond coughing the water from her lungs, all she can think about are those trees. She's fairly sure there is no wind. Her chin is barely off the sand, her neck muscles taut and on fire with the strain of keeping it out of the water, determined to stave off another bout of choking on the salty rinse, biceps shaking, head thumping. She needs to move. It takes her longer than she would have liked, but eventually she hauls herself over onto her back, every cut and bruise and wrenched muscle screaming as she does. She looks up at the sky, winded and blinking hard from the salt sting in her eyes and nose. Everything had seemed so bright when she'd first come to, but if it weren't for the fact that she can see the sun sitting at its zenith directly above her, she would have sworn the day was fast sinking into dusk. The trees are still whispering, and there is definitely no wind. On your feet, soldier! Despite everything, both the physical distance from home and the intervening years, she hears the familiar voice in her head as clear as day, and it makes her want to jump to attention as quickly as if he'd been there right beside her. Sir, yes, sir. He probably was. A man like her father wouldn't let something as trivial as death get in the way of bullying his only child. He'd haunt her just to spite her. He'd haunt her to win. She's pretty sure she's been in worse shape than this, though. Her arms and legs are weak, and she isn't sure she won't vomit once she gets upright, but given more time, maybe if she just lies down again for a few moments, just for a minute or two. Get up, idiot. His voice, always his voice. You were lucky you washed up alive from whatever trouble you got yourself into. Like as not, you should be dead. Go fuck yourself, Dad. She makes herself say the words. The Colonel is dead, long gone in dust, but she cannot shake the old feeling that he will know somehow. and she has the scars to show what happened to those who were insubordinate in his household, dead or alive. When she is ready, her breath finally just air, no more salt water in the mix, she stands. It takes her more than one attempt, and when she's finally something like steady on her feet, she becomes conscious of what feels like a sizable wound in her hairline. She touches it tentatively, probing as carefully as she can, and yes, there is the sticky evidence of what must surely be a lot of blood. Someone has dealt her a pretty good blow to the head, probably no longer than an hour or two ago. It makes her woozier to touch it, or even think about it. So instead she turns her attention to the beach. Frankly, after scanning its length as best she can, it doesn't make her feel any better. There is nothing and no one unexpected to be seen, which is good on one hand, but on the other, a whole lot of nothing means no help, and the unnatural silvery light of the prematurely dying day, cold and unwelcoming, makes her shiver. Unwillingly, she looks towards the susurrating tree line. It is dark in there, and, worse, still, utterly still. Yet somehow the trees are whispering, and there is no wind. Whatever happened to her, she knows without doubt that she is in a much worse predicament now. The bit in her brain that governs caution is screaming at her how not right this place is. It feels as though someone, or more likely something, is waiting for her in there. The beach is the proverbial frying pan. Still, risking the fire is better than being a corpse, right? Her father did not raise a coward, she reminds herself sharply, no matter that she always feels like one, especially now, not knowing where she is or what she's either run or been pushed from. A quick survey of her pockets yields little, just a wet box of matches and... Wait, it can't be. But it is. It's a pocket knife. That's a whole lot better than nothing. She needs shelter and water, or she is going to die here, and quickly. No matter how much she dislikes the idea, the trees are her only salvation. Squaring her shoulders, reminding herself who it was that had seen to the Colonel's eventual and horribly painful demise, his education had paid off after all. She takes a deep breath. She must have lost her boots and socks in the ocean, although of course she cannot recall how or when. But resolved, she starts to walk up the beach and towards the trees. She's only gone a matter of feet before she realises the sand beneath her bare toes is moving. She has the oddest feeling it is trying to warn her, the sand, to slip its message through her skin and into her bones, struggling to teach her the secret songs of that odd place. It is practically dancing beneath her, becomes increasingly frantic the closer she gets to the trees. It becomes harder to walk, harder and harder. The beach sucks at her feet like quicksand, seeming determined to stop her from entering the forest beyond. She tries to fight on, but finally falls to her knees a few feet from the tree line, unable to pull herself free from the grabbing sand. Her punishment is immediate. She begins to sink. She tries to claw her way out, panic driving her on, skin and fingernails ripping from their beds, blood caking the grit of it to her fingers as she scrabbles at the sand. How is this happening? Her head and heart pound with the certainty that she is going to be swallowed whole, the day still darkening around her, but she cannot gain purchase. She screams in frustration, but debris just tries to fill the space, and she is coughing and spluttering and scrabbling at the shingle. And then, just when her arms are becoming too heavy, too slow, and she thinks she is going to meet her end in that sandy sarcophagus, she is suddenly free again. With a licentious pop, she is up on her feet and, Despite the exhaustion, she is somehow running for the protection of the forest before whatever gave way on the beach can right itself and come for her again. The trees are still whispering, the sound more eager with every step that brings her closer to them, but her fear of the sand is absolute, so she does not stop, and still there is no wind. The moment she breaks through the tree line, the coolness of that dark harbour embraces her. Her heartbeat rises in her throat for a few ghastly moments, the rush of adrenaline getting in the way of her breath. But it calms more with every step she takes away from the beach and that dreadful sand, and eventually her chest catches up with her lungs. She takes a few more deep breaths, tests her hands to see how much they are shaking, and then wipes them as best she can on her soggy, sand-caked trousers. She is an absolute mess, but she is still alive. She won. As she begins to pick her way through the dark forest, she allows herself a small smile, nothing too smug. It is cool beneath the canopy, and the light seems as it should here. Why on earth had she been so afraid of it so short a time ago? Perhaps the whispering is running water somewhere up ahead. Frowning, she concentrates on the sound. She isn't entirely sure, but it certainly could be a stream. That would be some well-earned good news. She'll be able to drink, to clean her wounds and take stock. Yeah, she likes that idea. She likes it very much. For the first time since she opened her eyes to find herself washed up on the beach of that deserted place, bloody and bruised, she feels like everything will be okay. 100 pairs or more of red eyes look down from the higher reaches of the forest canopy, rustling the leaves in their excitement, watching the woman's progress. She has come! She has come at last! They have been waiting for so long. From the moment she landed on their island, they have been able to smell the promise within her, the sweetness of the blood that pumps beneath her skin, her muscles, young and strong. They have been so patient, such good, obedient creatures. They didn't go looking for her. How could they? She just washed up of her own accord. Surely that must mean something. Surely she is here for them. They chatter to each other, the sound like leaves in a stiff breeze, all positing the same conclusion. She is the one. The trees whisper breathlessly, and still there is no wind.
Finally, on-sub writer Halla Williams joined us for the prompt Tongues.
Silver Tongue. You heard that I had a silver tongue, that I will tell you a beautiful story about yourself. You're wealthy and privileged enough that, of course, you see me as beneath you. But my voice, my clothes, the way I hold your gaze, will never give away that I have mud and blood on my hands. Your giddy expectation of quick fruition for your hopes and dreams jostles aside your reservations. You place your coin in my hands. The gold glitters with sweaty desires, but I am not the object of them. You are. Orichalla, teller of potent tales, was coming back to the city. It was news of the very best kind for Tisande, whose hopes for a good love match had been dashed so many times. Orichalla would help her. The storyteller always chose someone worthy to help. No doubt many among the city's elite would petition Orichalla to choose them, to make a story about their future that would give them their heart's desire. But Orichalla would choose Tisande, because Tisande would tell her a story. And in return, Orichalla would tell her a better one where she was admired and loved. Tisande would ensure it. Orichalla would change everything for her. First, she hired the very best portrait artists the capital had to offer. 100 gold, Matryoshnia, to draw me exactly as I am. No minimizing my nose or lengthening my eyelashes. Draw me broken-hearted and bitter. The ugly mule they all see when I remove my makeup. Tisande wept as she wiped away the fine concoctions to show the artist the blotchy, ravaged, unlovable face beneath. She raised her chin, turning in the grey light to give Shonya the full picture. My gift is to find beauty. I cannot draw what you want. Your duty is to capture what your clients wish. Draw me like this. I cannot have such a work seen, Dimitar Tisande. It would ruin my reputation. This picture is for a very specific audience, Matryoshnia, and it is urgent. I promise it is between the three of us. You, me, and Matra Orichalë. Orichalë! I would not have her see you so. Why would you? That is none of your business. 1,000 gold, my promise to keep the work private, and you will begin now. The second part of the petition would be the letter that accompanied the portrait. Orichalë might be well read, so Tisande could not crib from the greats for her impassioned plea. But she had another idea. Her maids had talked of a notorious bard in the north of the city. He would help her craft her letter. Her mother's burly doorman, laden with enough silver to trouble him, found the man. He brought the nervy, tastelessly dressed bard to the courtyard garden where she conducted her private meetings. The bard would be intimidated to compose something for Orichalë, and she didn't want everyone knowing she'd applied, in the unlikely case she was unsuccessful, so she asked for something she could transform. Write me a love letter, bare my soul, make my lover pity me, and break their heart that I could be so tortured and still survive. If I describe you so, will it not drive your lover away? I could seduce them with your unquenchable passion. I've had many a success in that regard. Her look quelled his budding flirtation. You will write what I wish you to write, and tell no one. I will pay you 15 gold for your discretion. Tisande didn't stop the tears that dampened the page as she copied the bard's brutal rendition of her woes onto the petition letter. It added to the effect. Lastly, she added the expected sweetener, a personal item of worth. Tisande wouldn't give the storyteller anything truly valuable. Orichalë would know how much money her family had, and that would seem too easy. It had to be something thoughtful. Tisande braided her hair. Holding her breath, she severed it with a knife at the base of her neck. The wiry greys threaded through the brown-black plait looked suitably pitiful. The regret, and then the bitter satisfaction, made it all the more worthy. This would work. It would be worth it. Waiting was almost intolerable. When a letter came back, it was light, insubstantial. It was a refusal. No, no, no. Tisande's fingers were clumsy, trembling as she broke the seal and unfolded the missive. Come alone, bring my fee and your wish. Tisande's heart surged with triumph. Chosen! For this, if nothing else. It would change everything. But she had heard of others being refused at the last. She must stay sorrowful, authentic. Tisande bowed her head, to hide a smile only the gods could see. The details of the fee, the address, and the terms were brief. The time was that night. Tisande summoned the doorman. He could guide her, protect her, and wait outside. Her story was not for his ears. The small room was walled with silk, transforming it into the likeness of a tent. Orichalë was a shadow behind a partition. Zit! Orichalë's voice filled the whole space, shuddering the air. Tissande found her legs giving way and sat, quickly, gracelessly, on a cushion clearly placed there for the purpose. She wasn't embarrassed. She wanted to look piteous. Tissande widened her eyes and tilted her head forward to show a respect she didn't feel. Maitre Orical, I'm so grateful for your invitation. The woman who came around the divide was slight and pale, wearing fine, mystical-looking robes, but no jewellery. Her eyes flickered in the candlelight. The fee, child. Tissande offered out the banker's draft. The paper trembled in her grip most satisfactorily. Her mother had not objected to the expense. Perhaps she hoped Tissande would not continue to disappoint her. But to be called a child by a woman perhaps younger than her? Orical took the paper, examined it, and tucked it away in her robe. She sat before Tissande and held out her hands. Tissande didn't want to touch her, but the imperative was clear, and she placed her fingers in the woman's smaller ones. Orical drew her closer, and Tissande leaned forward. The woman tilted her head to examine Tissande's palms, and Tissande took the chance to examine her. Seeing the storyteller's pale brown hair and thin lips, she imagined her doffing the costume and going back to scrubbing pots after her telling, despite her steep fees. But when Orical gripped Tissande's thumbs and she returned the pressure, it was clear the woman's hands were as smooth as her own. How absurd that was. Then Orical looked up, and Tissande wondered how she could ever have mistaken her for a kitchen hand. Eyes like the sky above a sunset held her tighter than the small fingers that pressed her flesh. Your letter said you lacked beauty, were never enough to hold a lover's attention, that you could not make a good match. In your new story, this is not so. In your new story, you are a goddess to all who gaze on you. Tissande gasped at the blasphemy but wouldn't look away. She felt the power building between them, heating their clasped hands and starting to travel up her arms. You will leave here feeling your own power. Tissande could feel the storyteller's power. It reached her shoulders, then her throat, and Tissande was finding it hard to breathe. When you walk into the wintering ball, no one will see your impeccable dress, the lavish jewels, the phoenix mask you will wear. Tissande couldn't breathe at all. The strange feeling, wondrous and warm, but implacable and terrifying, had reached her head and stomach. She stared into the storyteller's eyes helplessly. They will see you in all your glory, behind the mask, behind the jewels, behind the dress, and want to be in your presence. They will yearn for you, Tissande. The feeling blazed behind Tissande's eyes, and she wept. Tears of delight, not self-pity. She felt powerful, beautiful, desirable. The suitor you invite to dance will feel privileged, will seek to charm you. The power had reached Tissande's loins and pulsed there as she imagined the thrill. But you must never fall in love with anyone, Tissande, or your power over them will leave you. If you fall for their charms, you will wither in their sight. Tissande shifted uneasily. The power hadn't reached her lower legs. She could still pull away. But what was such a cost to her, really? She wanted to be loved, but what good was loving? It had only ever hurt her. It might be a challenge, but with so much at stake, was there anything she wouldn't do? A fierce grin twisted Tissande's face. It was all worth it. She let the warmth fill her completely. It was done. You got what you wanted. Your heart's desire is coming. Your limbs swell with the power of fulfillment. Don't forget, It was my story that changed you. Tell others. Tell your rich friends. My tongue isn't silver. It's gold.
And that wraps up this look back at the guests and their stories from Season 7. We hope you had a great year of stories with us.
If you're a big fan of the pod, please do spread the word. We'd love to grow our audience, and for our part, we'll endeavour to continue inviting wonderful writers to join us on the Tiny Bookcase.
And with that, we'll say farewell to 2023 and roll on 2024. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?